Hi, I'm John,
And I'm Meredith.
and this is No Talking in the Library, coming to you from our homes. Although, in fact, like the library's open now, so I have to be there again in just under 11 hours.
No need to do the math.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's nice though having patrons back in the building. I know we all kind of enjoy the helping people aspect of being librarians, so it's kind of nice to be face to face. Although there was a lot less cleaning before people were around, so trade offs. If I recall correctly, you actually just recently watched Lady Bird for the first time.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, I think, and it keeps popping up as like you should watch this because it's a film about young girls coming of age and it's directed by Greta Gerwig. And I just want to get it out of the way right off the bat. I did not care for Lady Bird.
There's a whole bunch of shocking things here that I want to sort of advert to before we go any further. Number one, that it actually took you this long to watch it. Like if you just sort of those of you who may not be right up on the curve of what Meredith is about, when this movie came out, I would have thought that it would have just that you would have just absorbed it by osmosis without actually having to go to a theater to see it.
I know you'd think so. It stars Saoirse Ronan, and who I'm a big fan of. She was the star of Brooklyn, which, by all accounts, was an extremely boring movie about sad Irish immigrants, but she was very good in it.
Right. I mean, I love Irish immigrants, and that movie bored me to tears. And I love Saoirse Ronan, whose name
Um,
means freedom in Irish, by the way, for whatever that's worth.
but and it's to say nothing, the movie is obviously well made. Uh, in the history of the Academy Awards, only 5 women have been nominated for Best Director. One of these people is Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird. So I'm not saying it's not a well made film, but it is her passion project. I was reading just a little bit about it right before this, and this is one of those scripts that she had been working on for years, very much um, based off of her own experiences growing up. And I didn't. Laurie Metcalf plays her mom, and she's wonderful, but I just did not connect with it at all. I just found it extremely. Beanie Feldstein is in it, and she's such a great up and coming actress. I loved her in Booksmart with Caitlin Dever,
Hmm.
but God, it just nothing about it was interesting to me. I think also I do not care for Timothy Chalamet, who's the sort of like moody teen boy uh, figure.
Right. In everything he plays is or everything he's in, I think that's he's like Keanu Reeves. Like he has sort of one character which works better or worse in whatever he's in. In fact, I thought it worked pretty well on that. I mean, I think I may have enjoyed this movie more than you did, which is another
I'm
thing
sure you
which
did,
freaks
because
me out
I
because it's
really found nothing in it interesting or enjoyable.
right. I mean, normally, in movies, for whatever this is worth, unless like things are exploding or people are getting shot, like I just a lot of times it has a difficult time sort of seizing my attention. But I thought this movie was good, and I'm really kind of shocked that you were not that huge a fan of it. Although, what do I know? Um, but also, Greta Gerwig has more recently done something which I think that you did like more.
Yeah, and I think just really quickly before we move on, because I don't really have a lot of things to say about Lady Bird, other than I think I was also a little surprised myself about how little I cared for it. I mean, I've even seen The Host, that Stephanie Meyer alien movie, like that starred Saoirse Ronan, and I enjoyed that. Um, That's true, right? Not to just divert. She was in that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a long
Um,
time. I think that Greta Gerwig's work leans, and I don't know if this is a fair like genre to lump her in, but they a lot of times her and her, because she started, for anyone who's like, we keep saying Greta Gerwig, if you like don't know who that is, she's started as an actress. She works a lot with Noah Baumbach, and they're part of this film like genre called mumblecore,
right.
which I mean, who likes mumblecore? Who is it for? I don't understand.
Right. I've yet to meet anybody who's into mumblecore who I also didn't like, not like. But that's
Yeah,
uh
it's like awful. I saw another unrelated anecdote. I saw Tiny Furniture, Lena Dunham's like thing before she was like Lena Dunham of Girls,
right.
and she was like there at the screening, and I'm like, who is this weirdo like talking about her most boring movie? And then suddenly, literally like a year later, she was like everywhere, and I'm like, how? What is, am I crazy? Like, how is this happening?
Yeah,
But
as an aside, I think that maybe in the future we can do a whole episode on things that we probably should have liked but didn't. And I mean, okay, so to make the obvious switch here, um, a for reasons that would be obvious. More recently, Greta Gerwig did a new version of Little Women.
she
Um,
directed Little Women. Also, the film was nominated for Best Picture. She was not, because apparently it directed itself.
yeah,
My takeaway from that.
right. I mean, interestingly too, it had like a lot of the same people.
Saoirse Ronan
Timothy
is so
Chalamet's in
Marge.
it.
Yeah,
Saoirse
Timothy
Ronan's in it.
Chalamet is Laurie.
Uh, right, and in a way is just as is just as properly adapted to that movie. I think it was in Lady Bird, but whatever. Um,
Oh yeah, Laurie is like the original like emo sad boy next door. Like
right,
that was your she invented that. Louisa May Alcott invented that.
right. But so I remember seeing this about the same time you did, and this was another movie I should, I assumed you would like Lady Bird, but once again, what do I know? But this movie, when maybe I saw it like after you did, because I remember you telling me that story about the person who was a jerk when you went to go see it. Um, but it was just this is so obviously, I mean, because I know you love the book, uh, and it's a great, it's a fantastic book, certainly.
It's this I think that this has become the definitive adaptation of Little Women.
Right. There've been at least three others that I can think of
The one
offhand.
that people mostly I think associate is the one from the early 90s that had Winona Ryder, Claire Danes, Kirsten Dunst.
Right.
Oh, who played Laurie in that? Christian Bale?
No, it was I'm looking it up on IMDb right now because it was in my head like 10 seconds ago. This is from 1994 and it was oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Christian Bale. Yeah, you're right. Gabriel Byrne was in it.
Yeah.
Um yeah, you're right. You're right. I was thinking I had Gabriel Byrne mixed up with Christian Bale, but
Um I didn't love the Winona Ryder one. I remember being like long. I have a new theory about book to movie adaptations
do
that,
tell.
yes. First of all, this Little Woman is wonderful. If you have not seen it, please do. We have it at the library. I cannot recommend it just highly enough. Wonderful, cried. I was with three other people who are not like book people. They're my other like my non-library friends did not know, spoiler alert, Beth dies. And so like all of us were crying the whole time. It was wonderful. um I have this like new theory about like what makes book to film adaptations good, because this was so wonderful. A new version of Jane Austen's Emma has recently came out, also just came out in DVD, and also wonderful. Again, definitive version, way better than the Gwyneth Paltrow version. And I think there must have been some trend in the 90s where they were making these films and they were so like stodgy. They were just reciting the like words on the page. They were just, you know, there's just this feeling that stories set in the 1800s had to have a certain amount of like propriety and mannerisms.
Right. I think this is really true. I think this is
Yeah.
really true. Keep going, but yeah, I think you're really
And
onto
these
something.
new adaptations add like a layer of humanity. The Emma version is just like it's funny. Like people I think forget what humor Jane Austen had, especially that book has. That's why before this Amy Heckerling's Clueless was almost, I would argue, a better adaptation of Emma than anything that had come before it, because even though it was a story set in the 90s about like rich kids in the valley, or Beverly Hills or whatever, it captured the spirit and the energy of what Jane Austen was writing about. And this new version of Emma does that. Like, they're funny, they're human. Bill Nighy plays her like dad, and he's always like complaining about the heat and the cold and the drafts in the room, and he's always getting his like servant people to like move the little screen, and it's just hilarious.
Well, it's funny that I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day that I watched when we did the Austin and Autumn thing a few years ago. I got to run the showing of Sense and Sensibility, the 1995 version with Hugh Grant and et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned only Hugh Grant because it had that sort of like stodginess that you're referring to, as if what they were trying to do is really just sort of like visually translate the book, which is fine, I guess, but it made for a kind of a dull movie, which was sort of like emphasized by the fact that Hugh Grant, who was trying to sort of seem reticent, was just sort of moving from foot to foot the entire time, and it made you think that he really had to go to the bathroom. And just he's having these conversations, and you're just like, dude, just go. Like, she'll still be here in 5 minutes when you come back or whatever. Just, God, you're making me nervous. But I think that that's really true, and that's a real difference with the new version of Little Women. It
There's
really
such
is.
a lived-in quality of
Sure.
this movie. First of all, one of the things I really like about it, again, I think that creative types, people writing and directing these films, feel less caged in or hamstrung by the text itself. They're feeling like they can exercise a little creativity about the source material, and I really like that. So in this film, Greta Gerwig actually starts the movie in the middle, I maybe three-quarters through, middle-ish. And once again, for people who haven't read the or it's been a while, Little Women was actually published in two separate volumes. Little Women, and then I think Good Wives was what it might have been titled in the UK. It's a lot
Right.
of times, sometimes two separate books, so people might read the first one and not realize there's another volume.
Right. It was sort of originally
So
marketed as like educational literature almost, or sort of like be interesting to see like what the outcome of educating adolescent girls with that book. I mean, I think it'd be fine, but obviously it's sort of interesting that that's the way it was sold to the publisher anyway.
Yeah. Greta starts the movie sort of in the middle. The women are adults for all intent and purposes. I think an adult back then was about 17.
Right. Well, people only live to be about 32, so.
And she, throughout the whole movie, kind of goes back and forth between the scenes of adulthood after Meg, the oldest sister, gets married, and Amy, the youngest, goes off to Europe, and Joe, the one of becomes a teacher, and Beth's sick, and you see these scenes, and then go back to the earlier parts of the book, and they're shot completely different. The childhood scenes are shot with this wonderfully warm, you get this energy of siblings and family. And what I think is interesting is she uses the adulthood scenes to sort of, they run parallel to each other. So like the younger illuminate the scenes of adulthood, and they really play off each other really nicely in a way that I wouldn't expect. And it's an interesting way of approaching the book and approaching the story, because when you read it at the beginning, by the time you get to the end, there might be certain things that you might have forgotten, and it's really interesting to sort of put those next to each other.
Yeah, there's an openness to the narrative too, which I won't go into too deeply, just as a sort of, so as not to drop any spoilers, but it's really modernized in a lot of ways, and you can modernize these stories sometimes in a way that where it's arguable whether it works, but this really um, it was Greta Gerwig, I think, really used like more modern techniques in a way that accentuated elements of the story rather than sort of accentuated her role in telling the story, which is, I think, arguably one of the failings of people who try and update stuff from earlier periods. Louisa May Alcott, by the way, really fascinating character. I know that you're certainly very familiar with her biography, and I got sort of more familiar with it a few years ago when I think I did a talk about transcendentalism for the Austin and Autumn, and her father, Amos Bronson Alcott, was a first class nutburger who, among other things, started this commune called Fruitland, where um, I, if I'm recalling correctly, there's some weird thing about it, like it was like clothing optional or something like that. But also they like he didn't want them eating like tubers because they grew toward the devil, and uh, less humorously, the men would mostly sit around like talking about
Do not
transcendent.
even get me started with transcendentalist thinkers. Okay. I just want to side note, I apologize to my 11th grade English teacher, Mrs. Helbig. I loved your class. Thank you for writing me a college recommendation letter. Hated the Transcendentalists. Go on.
Yeah, no, it's funny. When I used to live in Somerville, Massachusetts, and when I would walk down into Cambridge, where Harvard is, you pass like the sort of transcendentalist like institute, which is in some like 18th century church, and I just thought, like, I mean, these guys were, their philosophy is really, I don't think, necessarily all that interesting. I think there's not a lot of super high end philosophy going on in the U.S. at that time. We can, those of you who see this and get terribly offended, I'm sorry, but I mean, there's nobody of the thinking quality of Kant or Hegel or Schelling or anyone like that. But
The idea of it is alluring, like
Right.
go out into nature and like commune with it and like really think about, Whitman's Song of Myself, like think about how you like what your place is
Sure.
with nature around you. And it was interesting because they were able to do this because they didn't have to farm all day to support a family. Times had changed at that point. But
Right.
and it's interesting. And that's kind of how I approached it when I was younger. And then get a little older and you realize that the only reason, you know exactly what I'm about to say, that's why you're making that face.
I
The only
do.
reason they were able to have all that free time to think about trees is because the women in their lives, their sisters and their wives, were at home doing all the housework, cooking their meals. Yeah. Thoreau sitting in that Walden Pond cabin was walking to his sister's house down the train tracks to eat his meals. So, they're not exactly Call of the Wild or whatever.
Right.
They're not
Yeah.
Jack London.
Right. They're not roughing it in any meaningful sense. And that's the thing about this, as far as I recall about Fruitlands, one of the sort of key features of it is the reason that they were like sitting around, like having all these like really elevated discussions, is because the women were doing all the work, and I mean all of it, like the housework, the farming, making the clothes, the whole shebang. And it's let's call it what it is. It's pretty grim, from, if you look at it from any sort of civilized standpoint. And but on the other hand, uh Louisa May Alcott, who sort of came out of that milieu, and was, I don't think, very much influenced by the whole transcendentalist. I mean, I think that she'd probably had enough of it by the time she got to adulthood. She didn't really think of herself as a writer. Am I right about
No,
that? I
she
mean,
wrote this book pretty much under duress. She had no interest in writing it. I don't think she liked writing it. I think she thought it was bad.
right.
Um, and it was written under to circle back to Little Women. It was written under the sort of constraints of what was expected of femininity and womanhood. So the book ends with the main character. This is my absolute favorite Little Women anecdote. The first part of the book, the main character Joe is sort of friends with the boy next door, Lori, and it's very clear that Lori likes Joe. And when that first volume was published, Louisa May Alcott got all of these letters from young female fans being like, when are Joe and Lori getting married? Like, when are they getting married? I can't wait. And Louisa May Alcott was so like irritated by the idea that the only thing Joe was like, the only thing that people could imagine Joe doing was getting married, that she intentionally married Lori off to the youngest sister Amy and made Joe marry the weird, rumpled German, like old German professor at the end. It's wonderful. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's really, it's interesting, by the way. The sort of old German professor type thing is interesting in the respect that uh so Middlemarch, just to pick a novel written by a woman that I also enjoy, one of the sort of uh like central plot points of Middlemarch, for those of you who haven't read it, is that um the main character gets sort of fascinated by this professor, Dr. Kasaban, and Dorothea gets fascinated by him and decides that she wants to marry him because she wants to live the life of the mind. And she marries him, and she realizes that he's a complete jerk, and that he has this really, all he wants to do is sit around and read books and have her like transcribe his idiotic theories about myth or whatever it is that he's writing about. And this is a kind of an interesting reversal on that, so that um, she really does. She really does get to live this kind of life of the mind, and sort of doesn't settle for the kind of brooding lump that Laurie is, but makes her own kind of decision. And that's that. I think a really interesting thing about these novels, 19th century novels written by women, is that a lot of it is trying to figure out how women can kind of run their own lives or make their own choices. I mean, Middlemarch is very much about uh, women very much need to be careful about the choices that they make, because uh, they don't get to make many of them, and if they get them wrong. And interestingly, the point about Middlemarch is that Dorothea gets out of this horrible choice that she's made and ends up in a kind of happy situation. But the point that Eliot, I think, was trying to make to people was, think about this. She very easily could have been condemned to a really horrible, destructive life. And it's because she, had to make a decision, got, for all she knew, one shot at it, and then, uh, and that was going to be it. And I think that Louisa May Alcott, in the same way, is sort of struggling with, how is it that women are going to live in society, and what kind of choices do they get to make, and what kind of lives are they going to live. And it's really interesting to see how she's sort of negotiating it in the course of this book. And then I think Greta Gerwig does a really good job of making that sort of manifest in the film. Like she clearly sees this and clearly sort of draws out the thread in the film itself.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite parts of her adaptation is that Greta Gerwig almost makes the movie that I think that she's making a movie that she believes Louisa May Alcott would have wanted to write, in my opinion. And she does it in such a skillful way that it doesn't betray the original ending that people might think is like, you know, unchangeable. Um and if you haven't seen it, I feel like I need to just like articulate it again because it's so wonderfully done. It's no surprise, I'm sure everyone knows Little Women is very much based on Alcott's life. And at the end of the movie, Jo has written this book and she is trying to get it published, but the publisher is like, why hasn't the girl gotten married at the end? And we're given this ending where you see that scene of Jo in the publisher's office, and then you also see a scene of the family and this the sequence of Jo racing in the rain to the train station to stop Professor Bear from leaving, and then she's with him and all of her sisters, and it's almost like, okay, you could read it as this is the end of the movie, but you could also see it as like this is the end of Jo's book, but
Right.
like she herself, it's not her own ending. And I love it because it gives you that you get to see the end of the movie, and if you are a novel purist, you could be like, that's the end of the book. But if you want to sort of read it a different way, it gives you that freedom to do so.
Yeah, this is what I love about the way she decides to tell this story, because she really, you can interpret it a number of ways. And I think when it happened, we had some, I think, good times discussing exactly what the possible outcomes were and why she did it that way. And it really, it's a movie that, if you want to sort of think deeply about it, there's some deep cuts in it. If you want to just enjoy a movie that's a really sort of an excellent story and a good sort of updating of a very classic narrative, it's on that. Uh, it's available on that level too. I'm really uh, every now and then I come back to that sort of famous quote from the book about uh, I'm not afraid of storms, for I'm learning how to sail my ship. Uh, and that's a sort of once again Alcott trying to sort of tell you, uh, uh, especially the women who read the book, right? Um, like you're going to encounter turbulence. That's the way life is, and you have to take that on board and move forward with it. And maybe in a weird way, that's something she got from her horrible father. Is that, I mean, Bronson Alcott, for whatever else you could say about the guy, he just never let adversity get him down. Most of the adversity he faced was results of dumb things that he did. But be that as it may, that she really took on that sort of, they were constantly having to kind of recoup their situation. And I think that gave her a kind of resilience that she reads into these characters, that, and makes in a way a kind of connection among them that maybe she wished was more a part of the family life that she actually lived.
Great film. That's all I have to say. I think it's Greta Gerwig. I mean, so far, I think it's her best, and I'm curious to see what her next project is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. She really. Uh, I came to it a little better off her last thing, but whatever. But yeah, I'm really curious now where this really was such a masterful reworking of this that uh, if she you got to think that at some point, well, okay, as someone who hopes that the right thing is done in the world, much as it never is, like you kind of hope that she eventually would win a Best Director Oscar, because she clearly deserves it. I mean, she's like
Yeah,
at that quality, and obviously not everyone gets
36
what they
or
deserve, but
something, so she's got a lot of time.
right, yeah, exactly. She's arguably the most interesting up and coming director in the English speaking world. So, well, wow, we had a lot to say about that. That's kind of cool. Uh, but I think that's all from us for this time. And
Yeah, I better stop now. I probably could have more things to say, but we'll end, end that
right,
there.
I think we've gotten through all our A material. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.